Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us as we celebrate the law school's alumni award winners and hear from Susie Ruth Powell. Dean Sheriff and I are so pleased to have all of you here with us for this very special occasion. We'd love to be seeing you in person, but we are absolutely thrilled to have you join us virtually. We're happy to have Eric Levasseur, President of the Law Alumni Association.
Muriel, can you adjust the volume?
Present the awards.
Muriel?
Thank you, Dean Berg. Good evening, everyone. My name is Eric Levasseur. I am the class of 2002 and president of the Law Alumni Association Board of Directors. As Dean Berg said, today provides us the opportunity to recognize the outstanding accomplishments of our alumni and faculty through the presentation of our annual alumni awards. The first award is named in honor of a past Law Alumni Association board president, Joan Gross, class of 1976. Joan has been an extraordinary leader for the law school, particularly related to its vital annual fund. The Joan Gross Annual Fund Award is awarded to a member of the Alumni Association at large who is an extraordinary advocate of the law school annual fund, fosters a culture of philanthropy for the law school, volunteers with the law school's annual giving or development office, and is a current donor to the law school annual fund. It is my pleasure to introduce the 2020 recipient of the Joan Gross Annual Fund Award, Andre Craig, class of 1982. Andre has worked as a claims attorney for the Progressive Corporation for the past 30 years, providing legal guidance to the New York, New Jersey, and Canadian business units. Prior to joining Progressive, Andre served as an assistant prosecutor and director of mediation for the city of Cleveland from 1982 until 1990. He has also served the Norman S. Minor Bar Association with its efforts to mentor minority law students and young lawyers. Mr. Craig has been a loyal supporter of the School of Law's annual fund for more than 30 years. He has also provided his time and talent to our students through his work with the Black Law Student Association, by mentoring young attorneys, and in encouraging his company to hire our students as interns. Please join me in congratulating Andre Craig.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm honored to accept this award. Again, it's always been my pleasure to serve the university in its efforts, in all of its efforts, fundraising, its efforts to recruit minority students. And as noted, I've always worked in the capacity, whether at the prosecutor's office or at Progressive. I try to mentor and help law students and young lawyers of all races. So once again, I'm honored to receive this award and thank you.
Congratulations, Andre.
Thanks.
Moving along, our next award is the Distinguished Recent Graduate Award. This award is given to a recent graduate who exceptionally fulfills one or more of the following criteria: professional accomplishment, significant participation in professional activities, involvement in community activities, and involvement in law alumni affairs. This year's Distinguished Recent Graduate Award goes to James Pash, class of 2010. Prior to entering the legal profession, Mr. Pash worked on Capitol Hill, first for Senator Frank Lautenberg, and then on the Senate Judiciary Committee for Senator Patrick Leahy. He then built a thriving small firm litigation practice here in Cleveland. For 5 years, Mr. Pash first served as Senior Gifts Officer and later as the law school's Assistant Dean of Development and Alumni Affairs during the law school's capital campaign. He helped raise an unprecedented $58 million, including a $10 million gift to endow our new Environmental Law Center. Mr. Pash currently serves as the Midwest Regional Director of the Anti-Defamation League, which covers 4 states. He has been highly visible in the media in his fight against discrimination of every kind. Most recently, James launched a pro bono legal assistance program to assist victims of hate crimes in Ohio. Mr. Pash has also distinguished himself as a member of the Beechwood City Council. He has served 2 terms as a councilman, including as vice president and chair of the legal committee. He was recently appointed president of the council. Please join me in congratulating James Pash.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Dean Bergs and Dean Scharf. It is a real honor to accept this award this evening, and would like to congratulate all the alums out there who are making a difference in Cleveland and across the globe, and our tremendous faculty and staff at Case Western's Law School that continue to excel and make us incredibly proud to be alums. So thank you.
Congratulations, James.
Congratulations, both Andre and James, for those very well-deserved awards. I would like now to present the Distinguished Teacher Award, which recognizes a full-time adjunct or visiting member of the faculty whose commitment to education and the pursuit of knowledge has enriched the personal and professional lives of our students. The recipient of this award should be a communicator, a motivator, a scholar, a model, and an influence, and a teacher whose personal and intellectual qualities have left their mark on students. This year's Distinguished Teacher Award goes to Professor Cassandra Burke-Robertson, the John Deaver Drinko Baker Hostetler Chaired Professor of Law. Professor Robertson regularly teaches civil procedure, professional responsibility, and secured transactions, and has also taught transnational litigation and remedies. Her innovative teaching has not been unrecognized, and she's won both the 1L and 3L Professor of the Year awards. In addition, she recently developed a fully online asynchronous professional responsibility class, allowing students incredible flexibility in completing their requirements in this area. Professor Robertson is also a prolific scholar. She directs the law school's Center for Professional Ethics, whose mission is to explore moral choices across professional lines in a variety of disciplines. Her scholarship focuses on legal ethics and litigation procedure within a globalizing practice of law. She's co-authored a popular casebook in the field of professional responsibility and published articles in the Columbia Law Review, Emory Law Journal, and Boston University Law Review, among others. She was previously acknowledged as the 5th most cited faculty member nationally in the area of professional responsibility, and her work has even been cited in a majority opinion in the US Supreme Court. Please join me in congratulating Professor Robertson.
Dean Berg and Dean Scharf, thank you so much for that. It is a real honor to be here, especially with this amazing panel around me. I'm really sorry we couldn't all be in person tonight, but for the alumni online that are listening, please keep in touch, and hopefully in another year we'll all be able to be in person together.
Okay. Well, congratulations, Cassandra. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Michael Scharf, and I have the honor to present the Centennial Medal Award, which was established in 1992 by the Law Alumni Association to recognize exceptional, meritorious achievement. It is the highest honor the law school bestows on one of its graduates. I am happy to announce that this year's Centennial Medal Award recipient is Susie Ruth Powell, class of 1973. Professor Powell is a former managing partner. Professor Powell is a former managing attorney and litigator with NC Legal Services and assistant professor of law at North Carolina Central University School of Law. Her career highlights include litigating issues of housing, domestic violence, food stamps, and childcare in both Ohio and North Carolina, and teaching contracts, trial practice, and legal writing, as well as training clinical students. Among her significant accomplishments, Professor Powell is the co-author of the Emmy Award-winning HBO documentary, The Loving Story. The film is based on the story of Richard and Mildred Loving, an interracial couple who lived in Virginia in the 1950s, and their legal struggle to live as husband and wife, culminating in a victory in the US Supreme Court. She is also credited with story development for The Rape of Reese Taylor. It's her second documentary film, which tells the story of a 24-year-old Black mother from Alabama who was sexually assaulted at gunpoint by 6 white youths as she left church in 1944. Taylor's tenacious struggle to obtain justice gained national attention and became a staging post in the civil rights movement. We thank Professor Powell for exposing a new generation of Americans to these stories about fighting racial intolerance at a time when the issue of racial justice is on everyone's minds. We are absolutely thrilled to have Professor Powell with us today to talk about her remarkable career in poverty law and her work on award-winning documentaries related to racial justice. After her remarks, Professor Powell will be happy to answer questions that you type into chat. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to turn things over to Professor Susie Powell.
Thank you, Michael, for that introduction. Thank you so much. I'm not sure I deserve it. The notification of this honor arrived in a letter that stunted my thoughts. So I called up to ask the law school why. And that's when I learned that as I went about my daily life, the last 40 years, it seems as though I'm being watched. It's as though there were spies out there watching me as I drove my car, singing to myself, talking to myself. Let me say thanks from the bottom of my heart. But my gratitude, with that, I have to assign some blame. This has made my life a living ordeal, but oh so good. It's caused me to sweat and lose sleep because I want to make you proud. This brings me to an important point about the field of law. It is the place where actions of interception with people and property cause us to assign blame. And it would be great if the law sought to restore rather than take away. I'd really like to see the law provide more rewards, but it doesn't. I thought about it as I went about all the way back to Hammurabi and the codified laws of punishment. And then my law school wants to award me for my work. And what I want to say to all of you is thank you. Thank you to the co-deans, to Michael, to Jesse, to Eric. Thank you to the alums, my friends, to my law professors, Professor Katz and Professor Gabinet, those wonderful people. But they were unsmiling men who said to us on the first day of class, look to your right, look to your left. And do you know the rest of that sentence? One of you will not be here next year. A law school classroom is a difficult place. It looks calm, but it's a battlefield. It's where we wash the floors in sweat and blood and hope and dreams. But we made lasting connections there too. And I want to sing out to Marcy Newman, who is a wonderful lawyer in the city of Chicago. And she and I did moot court together, and the judge told her at the end that she needed to stand up when she made a motion, but she was standing up. She's short. My other two friends, Joyce Neiditz Snow, who survives her husband, David Snow, wonderful federal judge. My friend Ruth Zach, who also, the three of us have lost our life partners. And then the surprise for me was to discover Susie Walsh, who's the president of Bennett College. She's also a graduate of this law school. My dear friend who was to have been my date if I showed up on campus for this award is the Honorable Allison K. Duncan, newly retired from the Circuit Court in Richmond, Virginia. So here I am. I am Susie Ruth Powell. Ruth comes from the Bible. I am loyal and stubborn, and I stand by my people, and I love ideas, and I care about the world. I'm a child of Jim Crow. And the first point I want to make about my legal career is that Jim Crow was legal. Adolf Hitler, the things that he did were legal. Law for me became a place where confrontation took place to make the laws better. There is no justice in the law without confrontation. And speaking of that, I'd like to recognize my hero, Fred Gray, who went to the same law school with me. I'm so proud. He was the lawyer for Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King. Too many people didn't know that, so I set up an endowment in his name at Case Western Reserve, and I don't know if it's appropriate, but I'm going to ask you to contribute to that scholarship fund. The law is the place where we confronted Jim Crow. And when I went to the Smithsonian Historical Museum, the Black Historical Museum at the Smithsonian, and I saw the porcelain water fountains for whites and the sort of rusty looking, ungainly water fountains for Black people, I was with my niece. And she looked at me accusingly because I had somehow forgotten to explain to her the trappings of Jim Crow, that world that I grew up in, with the segregated schools that were dilapidated, receiving textbooks after the white children had used them, torn them, and marked them up. I had not told her about how every time we went into town, we drove past the public library, and I kept insisting that I wanted to go because at a very early age, I loved books. And my mother said, "You cannot go there. It is for white people." I didn't believe her because the story lady told us every Saturday on the radio that we could come to the library and she would read books to us. I sat on the steps of a white hospital after my tonsillectomy. I had been there for 3 days in a place where our family doctor could not practice. And my father had paid the bill and come to pick me up and was taking me home. My mother was home pregnant with her second child. And when Daddy went to get the car, I'm sitting there, my throat is hurting, and I'm waiting for him to come back and pick me up. A group of white boys came by and stoned me just because I was a little nigger girl who was sitting on the steps. There was no law that said they could do that, but there was no law that would prevent it. I went to Bennett College in Greensboro, North Carolina. And there was recent history, well, not that recent, in the 1970s, the KKK, with the help and the knowledge of the police, killed a number of people in that city. People who had come together to have a conference, to talk, to demonstrate, and to find ways to combine ideas about how to cure racism. One of those victims was a Duke doctor. Another was a woman who was a graduate of Bennett. It was a mixed group, whites and Blacks. And when I went to Bennett back in the 1960s, Greensboro was the place where the civil rights movement was very active. My father was on his deathbed when I was leaving for college, and he had two things to say to me. My daddy was uneducated, but very smart. I think he had a photographic memory, and he seemed to be able to read minds. I'm not sure. He explained to me that he had put aside a trust fund for me that would pay for college. And he only wanted one thing from me. That was a promise that I would not engage in the civil rights movement because he was really afraid. And I promised him that I would stay out of it. I broke that promise, and I was arrested trying to see a movie in Greensboro, and I spent 7 days in jail. The things that happened to me in the civil rights movement, things that happened to me when I was growing up on my father's farm with sharecroppers and knowing the difficulties that they went through, was that I developed a deep empathy for people of poverty. After Bennett, I went to Smith College. I got a master's degree in teaching. I tried to teach. I wrote my letter of resignation before the end of the first semester because I was terrible at it. And I went back to the poverty movement. Lyndon Baines Johnson was president. And I went to work with a group in Vermont called Community Action, SAVCA, Southeastern Vermont Community Action. And I was doing a great job. I was doing organizing, and I learned to read budgets, and I could write proposals, and I had a great boss. He left to go to work for the Peace Corps. I took care of the organization for a year. We hired a new guy as the director. And the first thing he did when he got on the job was to tell me that he could not have me as his assistant director because I was a woman. So I locked my jaws and went to law school. I took an attitude with me into law school. I saw law as an area for reform. And I think sometimes I got C's because I think I wrote my exam answers as though the law, every law, was to be confronted and conformed. Anyway, after law school, I maintained that interest in poverty. I went to work for Cleveland Legal Services. I got married to my late husband, Franklin Anderson, who was also involved in the poverty movement at that point. He checked out a little bit later. And we were dealing with cases of evictions and domestic violence and housing. And when the phone call came into the office one evening that a group of Black women in the low-income housing, a low-income housing area needed a lawyer to help them deal with a rent increase, I showed up at that meeting. Now, the law was that you paid your rent, you got to stay. You could not say to a landlord, "You've done no maintenance on my apartment, I want to withhold my rent." What I did was I got in front of the eviction process. I filed a lawsuit, and oh, by the way, the landlord was the United States of America. So the lawsuit was Garden Valley versus James Lynn, who was head of HUD in the United States of America. I sued, and we proceeded to collect rent every month, and we put the rent into a secret bank account. Now, we could not hold back that rent and ask them to fix up the irregularities in those apartments. They would have been evicted one by one. But it's interesting, in this capitalistic nation, we had some money in a bank account that was growing and increasing. So I won't spend any more time on that case, but I made several court appearances in front of Judge Lambros in which he demanded each time I tried to discuss the case. He never wanted to talk about the case. All he wanted to talk about was, where was the money? I refused to tell him. And he threatened to hold me in contempt of court. I left my house one day and I looked at my husband and I did not tell him that I might not be back that afternoon. But you know, he blinked. He did not put me in jail. I don't know why. Eventually that case was settled. But I want to talk about my tactics that I used as a lawyer. And then later I'm going to get to my love of storytelling too. When I taught trial practice at North Carolina Central University, I taught my students that whether you're on the offense or the defense, on day one, when you speak with your client, when you decide to take the case, on that day, you open a file, you begin to collect the information as though you are going to go to a full-blown trial. That way, you don't have to find yourself 6 months later going back and putting a case together. You treat the case from the very beginning as though it's going to blow up into something big. It also prepares you for filing different motions that can postpone some action in that case. If you do that, you are less likely to go to trial, but if you go to trial, you are ready. My other tactic, and I learned that it's not just a matter of knowing the statutes, the common law, the precedents. It's knowing the story of the case. And I have an example of a case I did in North Carolina. There was an hourly worker who drove a forklift in a plant, in a factory, and he was moving boxes. The boxes fell off, and he crashed into a wall and crashed the boxes and everything. Of course, he was fired. And North Carolina is a right-to-work state. They can fire you for blinking. At any rate, he was fired. He didn't expect to keep his job. What he did not expect was that they would sue him for the damage to the wall and the forklift. And he came to me. I studied over that case. I had no defense, except that he's judgment proof. He was poor as the devil. I had no defense. However, it occurred to me to go and find out how that accident happened. My husband at that point had gotten out of poverty, and he owned a factory with 300 workers. I went to his plant, and one of his managers, a white guy, I said, would you show me how to drive a forklift? When I drove that forklift across the floor, I realized that the statements in the complaint were erroneous. The statement was that he had failed to put his foot on the brake, or he put his foot on the brake, whatever it was. The guy who brought the lawsuit didn't know how a forklift worked. And I had him because I had asked for a continuance to delay the case, and he had refused. And so he's not going to get any leeway in terms of being able to amend the complaint. And I tell you this because that was my other tactic, to never underestimate the laziness of the person on the other side and never underestimate their ignorance. And that one I kind of learned from my husband, who used to go around pretending to be stupid because he wanted people to underestimate him. And Allison knows about that. So my tactic, those tactics, I think, stood me in good stead. But I also had the situation that I was a law reformer, and any case that I dealt with, I was looking at a way to make the law just or to change an interpretation of it. I think I've run out of time. Keep going? Okay. My other point, and I'm going to now talk about storytelling. My other point is that I think about how punitive our laws are. We wait until someone does something wrong. They run over you in a traffic circle. They fail to do something, and we punish. We don't have any laws that reward people, and that has bothered me a little. I got into a discussion with somebody about that, and they said, well, that's impossible. Well, why not? Why not have laws that say if you file your income taxes in January, you get a 0.5% off? Just a thought. Okay, now I want to talk about the Loving story. The Loving story was one of the most satisfying things I've ever done. I served on a number of boards here in North Carolina. I got involved in art. I got, governor appointed me to the State Arts Council. I'd go to meetings all over the place. I got involved with museums. And somehow, and I think it was Adrian Fox who gave my name to a woman who had come to North Carolina to start a documentary film festival. I didn't know what documentary films were, but now I think we're pretty well known all over the country, and it has been acquired by Duke University. And it's a wonderful, wonderful way to spend a weekend and a week seeing 10 movies a day. At any rate, hold that point. At some point, I read an obituary in the New York Times, and it was about the death of Mildred Loving, and it gave me pause because I remembered when that case was brought, and it gave me pause, and I felt for her, and I felt for the courage that she had shown. Nancy Bursky, the founder of that documentary film festival, had read a novel that I wrote, which has not been published for different reasons, because they said nobody wants to read about that. Nancy loved my writing, and she asked me to write that story. When I got into it, I was fascinated by several legal points. Okay, you have a couple who are sleeping in their home, and they live in the country. I grew up on a farm. You don't lock your doors on the farm. But the cops came with 3 others, and they kicked down the door, and they wanted to find those 2 people in bed. They took them to jail. They were tried. And the judge said, God never intended for the races to mix, and they either could separate or they had to leave the state. They left the state. Mildred was miserable. When they finally, she wrote to Robert Kennedy, and he sent her to the ACLU. And the point I want to make, and this is the story part that really touched me, the lawyers knew that they wanted to take that case to the US Supreme Court. And it was like climbing some stairs. They had to go back to the state court because the judge had issued an opinion, but it wasn't written. They had to get a written opinion from him. Then they had the problem that the statute of limitations had expired. And what I love, creative people are people who say, what do you mean it can't happen? What do you mean it can't be done? There has to be a way to do this. And this lawyer said, wait a minute, they cannot come back to the state. And I think somewhere it said for 10 years. That means they are still within the breast of the court. So they got around the statute of limitations. Then as they went through each level from the district court to the Court of Appeals, all the way up, at each level, Richard Loving was heartbroken. He kept thinking that they were going to rule on his side. And I've seen clients used to do that to me. They'd hear you make a really great argument and it felt so good. And they thought that that would make the judges rule in their favor. Well, that did not happen. What Richard did not know was that his lawyers didn't want a good decision in the state court. They didn't want a good decision in the Court of Appeals. They wanted this decision to come from the United States Supreme Court, and then it affected the whole United States. And it did. And they got their freedom to come home. The sad thing about the case is that, well, it's not sad. You kind of like to see people break unjust laws. She was coming back and forth to Virginia all the time, riding in the trunk of the car with her mixed race children sitting up front. The state of Virginia said that the reason that interracial marriage was wrong was because it would mongrelize the race. They'd already done that. But anyway, that was an interesting case. The one last thing I want to say about the Loving story, and there were things that I wrote that got left out, and that's fine. One of my favorite things was that one of the amicus briefs that was filed in that case was filed by a Japanese man whose family had been interred during World War II. Again, there are laws that are wrong. It was legal to do that to them. But his point when he argued before the US Supreme Court, he looked around and he said, I'm the only person in this room who is of pure blood. All of you are mongrelized and mixed up. Reese Taylor, that was a very touching case, and we were able to get the movie done just prior to her life ending. I wish I could tell you that she had a good life, but she did not. She ended up as a day worker. She had to support her daughter. Her daughter was killed in an automobile accident. But to make a long story short, I identified, as a girl who grew up on the farm, I identified with her going to church and walking home at night. Going to church and walking home, swinging your arms and singing. And the car lights come by and light up the dark, and then the dark comes back, and then the car lights come. And in one of those cases, the car lights came and they slowed down, and the white men demanded that she get into the car with them. I can't remember. I think that after all 7 of them had had their way with her, I think they threw some money at her. I'm not sure. They said they did. They said they paid her, but it doesn't matter. A couple of them went off to war and got honorable discharges and got medals. That was a case where you see what grand juries do. And we've just seen that in the case of Say Her Name. Yes. The grand jury, of course, was at that time was made up of all white males. They listened to the case that was presented to them by the prosecutor, who was not interested in prosecuting this case. And there was no justice ever brought. I met her brother, who is still alive, when we showed the movie here in Durham, North Carolina. My niece and I drove him to see the movie, and he was very sad. And he said that Reese Taylor was his mother. His mother died when he was a baby. And so you had this little girl who carried her brother on her hip and took care of him. And all these years, he sheds tears for what happened to her. They took her into the woods on the ground and they violated her. This is what Black men were lynched for having thought of it, except that they didn't. I think I'm done. I forgot to congratulate the other winners. I believe it was Andre and Cassandra, and was it Eric? No, it wasn't Eric. But congratulations to you. And I'm particularly proud to hear about Case Western Reserve getting into the field of environmental law. I'd love to sneak up there and when classrooms are open. And environmental law is very, very special for me. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Eric. Thank you. Thank you.
Susie, thank you so much for that extraordinary presentation. I don't think we've ever had a Centennial speech that was that compelling, and people are never going to forget this. Congratulations again on your Centennial Award. I see that it is behind you on the table, and I hope that it stays there in your house and that you enjoy it. Thank you for showing that to us. We do have questions coming in, and they're excellent questions. So I'm going to read the first one to you This is from Trina Jones, and it says, "Congratulations on this well-deserved award, Professor Powell. Thank you for sharing your personal narrative and for your service to society." And here's the question. Given your experience in this country and with the law, would you please reflect on the transformative potential, or not, of the present moment in which we have seen mass protests in the streets with a substantial backlash against unjust laws and systematic racism?
Thank you, Trina Jones. I know who you are. This has given me a lot of thought, and I've lost a lot of sleep. There's so much misinformation about what is happening at this moment. I'd heard for years that the Black Lives Matter was a racist movement right up until George Floyd. I think when the difference now from when they did lynchings in the 50s and the 40s and the 30s is that people walk around with cameras, and that's a good thing, except for what they're filming. I am hoping and praying, because I've been terrified of, I participated in the civil rights movement. I spent time in jail. What we got out of that was the right to go to restaurants, to movies, public accommodations, and it opened up a whole world for us. But what I see now is that we could go back to that. And a lot of people are in favor of that. So I remind myself of what Barack Obama said. He said, you make progress and it doesn't continue in the same direction. You make progress and you'll fall back and you'll make progress. What I am hoping, I'm banking on the young people in this country. I've got gray hair. There are too many white-haired old men in Congress and in the Senate. They've been there so long. They go off to Washington all the time just to keep their jobs. They're very comfortable. They have the best socialized medicine in the world, and they don't want to give it up to the rest of us. Trina, I have a faith in the American people, and Blacks are kind of at the bottom of all this, because no matter what has happened through our history, we never gave up on the American dream. And if we can continue to stay with that, Black Lives Matter, we've got a chance. The next, what do we have, 30 some days are crucial. I hope that answers. I don't know.
Well, we're waiting for more questions, and I'm hoping for a tidal wave of them. I have one for you. So to build on the comments you just gave to the last question, what advice would you have for our law students who want to follow in your footsteps and make a difference?
That's a hard one. I went with poverty law and I stayed with it. But my late husband, who's a Clevelander, really felt that Blacks were neglecting the entrepreneurship side of life. He wanted to see us own our own businesses and venture into the business world. I once gave a speech at Bennett and I told them, you're going out looking for jobs, you're smart, hire each other. I guess that's my answer. I think that's my answer.
Well, that's a good one. And I should tell you and everybody who's listening, we have an associate dean now for diversity named Brian Adamson. I don't know if you know him, but we'd love to introduce you to him. he has helped us create a dean's cabinet on diversity. And one of the big things it's trying to help us with is with placement, with minorities, and especially having people who have really made it turn around and help those behind them. And that's the advice you just gave. I'm eager for more questions. I have one while we're waiting. You did mention your experience in law school, and I see that Lou Katz is on, and he wrote, when you said that he and Leon look to the left and look to the right, he said, Susie, I never said that. And I'm sure Leon Gavinet didn't either. Congratulations and best wishes.
But there were some mean professors who did say that. No, they did not say that. There were some mean ones who did.
So, can you tell us what courses in law school you found most helpful to your career?
This was what surprised me. I went there with a law reform attitude, and I discovered that all property, contracts, criminal law, all of those staid old courses, they all played into what I ended up doing with my life. There were no courses there about, well, I think there was a consumer law course. I did a paper on redlining as an independent project, but all of the how should I say, the traditional law is what has to be understood in order to work with poverty. The economics, and for example, contracts, you've got landlord-tenant, you've got, well, the criminal law is pretty obvious. I need to make a comment about what has happened with criminal law, because we have private prisons now. And the saddest thing that could ever have happened to this nation is to have the prison system become a place that needs to make a profit. And it makes me so sad. In addition to that, we have people, men and women in prison, mostly men, whose crimes have no victims except themselves, if themselves. And I have strong feelings about that.
Thank you. So I'm looking at the questions that are starting to pour in. This one's from Brian Adamson, who I just mentioned. He says, "Dear Susie, congratulations on your well-deserved award." Hold on a second. As I was reading it, it scrolled upwards. There it is. He says, "Your triumphs in the fields of social and racial justice are an inspiration. I'd like to know about your experience as a law student." And he mentioned specifically some of your classmates or contemporaries, Gerald Jackson, Carolyn Watts, and others.
Yes.
Can you tell us some of your memories?
Yes. That brings me back to the Black Students Association in law school, which was very special. Yeah, I remember Gerald, and I remember law school was a scary place. I went there with my law reform attitude. I was a few years older than the other students. I thought I was going to work hard, but I thought I was going to breeze through. And it turned out to be so challenging, because the study of law changes the way you think. I'm an English major. Let us go then, you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky like a patient etherized upon a table. I get to law school, and once they really indoctrinate me, I could no longer read poetry. That was personal, and I'm a storyteller. I could not read poetry. I could not read novels, because there's a different thinking about the law is very different. I remember there were crunch times when people were just really afraid. there were guys who would say to you, oh, you're not going to study that hard, are you? You know, that was how they competed with you, by telling you that they didn't read those cases. They get called on and they'd read those cases. It was a funny place. It was an amazing place. I'm so glad I did it. And I got driven there because I wasn't fit for a job as a woman.
So, Susie, you were obviously fit, and the former boss who thought that, you know, shame on him, right?
Yeah.
So Bonnie Gold writes, if you could change one aspect of the American, quote, way of life, end quote, or, quote, the American dream, end quote, what would it be?
I'd fix the education system, and I'd find a way to reward students. I find that what we're going through at the moment with the tension and the clashes of attitude, people don't have any curiosity about life. People we've become tribal. And once you're in that tribe, you don't have to think through the issues. Everybody in that tribe is against abortion, and they're against Black Lives Matter, and I'm not saying that which way I am, but our education system has done something that has killed the curiosity in people. I've continued to learn and teach myself. I retired in 1991, and I'm still doing research and I'm still learning. And I just find that people lack curiosity. I read somewhere that the civics classes got substituted by some kind of social classes. We were taught how the government worked. And so it became a part of you. And that was in segregated schools. So my thing is, I want to see us invest in all the children in this country. And that means investing in the schools. And I do not want us building new school buildings. I want us investing in children and in the learning. In Europe, they go to school in 600-year-old buildings. It can be old shopping centers once the pandemic is over. I see education as the big problem.
Our next question is from Anthony Cox. He writes, what does Professor Powell think about the looting and trashing of stores and businesses in Cleveland and other cities, many owned by minorities?
I am under the impression that the real Black Lives Matter people like me, we have so much at stake that they're not the ones doing the trashing and the looting. And after I heard this morning about the attempt to kidnap the governor of Michigan, and when I heard about how deep that goes and what a terrorist act they're committing, I believe that those acts are being carried out by people who forgot that they lost the Civil War. They can't fly Nazi symbols in Germany, but here they argue about flying the Confederate flag. And it all comes under freedom. But we don't have the freedom to drive around without fastening our seatbelts. Maybe, I know that in South Africa, they did some reconciliation tactics where they actually talked about race. They talked about it. If I'm able to talk to you about it. I can tell you that if you've had cataract surgery, that procedure was invented by a Black woman. The real McCoy, that was a Black man. There was a Black man, a former slave, who manufactured cars in Ohio after just before the Depression. There are so many situations where we have proved ourselves over and over, and we still believe in this dream. We still believe in it, and we're being blamed. And our movement is being taken over. Makes me very sad. I wish I were younger. I'd be out there.
Susie, the next question comes from Paul Spanos. He says, what are your thoughts on the Office of Management and Budget's memo, OMB M20-34, which prohibits federal government training on critical race theory and effectively prohibits any racial justice training?
I don't know enough about that memo. It kind of reminds me of the president who was in opposition to the New York Times. I can't really answer that question. I'm sorry. I don't want to talk about a memo that I don't know.
That's fair enough. It's something on a lot of our minds, and people are researching it even as we speak.
I will be looking into it, yes.
Yeah. This one's from Suzanne Walsh, another one of our wonderful alums. She says, what role does the arts play in social justice and civil rights?
Oh, let me tell you. When I was growing up, I grew up on a farm in North Carolina. I went to a school that was so close, I walked to school every day. I was late all the time because I was a dreamy little child, and I walked around reading books and everything. When the news began to come that Brown v. Education was in the courts and we were reading about it, the counties in the South got very, well, at least in North Carolina, got very edgy because they'd always argued that they maintained separate but equal facilities for education. Now, in our schools, when it rained, the roof would leak. We didn't have books. Our library was smaller than my kitchen. I used to go in and check out books, our library in our school. So the county fired all the art teachers and the music teachers because they said art and music were the frills of education. And I believe that that's where education began to deteriorate in this country. Art and music are as important to the soul as mathematics. That's what I have to say about it.
Susie, I think you'd be happy to know that our law school has a faculty student band that played at the House of Blues a couple of weeks ago at a benefit concert for Legal Aid Society.
Oh,
so we are showing the flag for the arts in our own way. This is going to be the last question. It's from Rob Simpson. It says, as a fellow case law alum, what is your recommendation for preserving your story and the stories of many of the great Black lawyers who have graced the CWRU halls, such as Fred Gray?
I've been told that I need to write my autobiography, and I'm going to do that. I think back to, and this is something the federal government could do. During the Depression, there were oral testimonies were collected and put in the Smithsonian Museum of former slaves, and I mean, that is a marvelous collection. I am going to write my story. I know that one story has been done about Fred Gray, and my life is pretty weird. My father was 60 years old when I was born. My mother was the age of his youngest child. I grew up the, daughter of this old man. He'd walk around, take me downtown to buy me shoes, and people would say, "Your grandfather?" No, it's not my grandfather. That's my father. I grew up on a farm. There were a lot of things that were different in my life. My parents had values about education, and so there were times when children worked on the farm and there'd be 5 or 6 of us in a classroom, and we were the children whose parents weren't poor. These stories need to be told. The Smithsonian Museum has preserved a lot of our history. And I think the mood that we have in the country right now, I think these stories will be written. I'm going to write mine, dictate it, have my niece write it.
Can you bring your niece into the video so we can say hello to her too? I know she's been hugely helpful to you in preparing for this Zoom webinar. And let me say, Susie, I think you have whet our appetites for your autobiography. We can't wait to see that.
Okay, I've done it. Okay.
On behalf of co-dean Jessica Berg, Eric Levasseur, the president of our Law Alumni Association, and myself, thank you everybody for joining us today for our annual Law Alumni Dinner. This one is a webinar. Congratulations again to Andre Craig for the Joan Gross Award, James Pesch for the recent Graduate Award, Professor Cassandra Robertson for the Distinguished Professor Award, and most of all to Susie Ruth Powell, our Centennial Award winner, who gave us an unforgettable presentation. Next year, we look forward to seeing all of you in person. Thank you, everybody, for your support of the law school, for being wonderful alums and professors and friends of the school. Have a great weekend and stay well.
Thank you. Thank you.